Oh, hello, come in. Come in, nice to have a seat. Nice to see you again. It's been a while again, partly because I've been so taken up with things. It seems to be a very busy October. Was supposed to have been teaching a course in Vancouver at Regent College called A Passion for Poetry, but COVID has meant that I can't travel, so I'm doing that online, and I'm also preparing various other things. Again, I should have been in Nashville doing a thing on this Ordinary Saints project. It's beautiful. I've shown you this book before. These beautiful paintings by Bruce Herman. That's Bruce Herman himself. And the poems I wrote with them. And then the beautiful music by Jack Redford. And we're supposed to be doing all that live, but we can't, so I'm having to prepare online things of that. So one thing after another. But as I say, I'm teaching a course called Passion for Poetry. There's no point in teaching such a course if you don't actually have a passion for poetry. And in a sense, although this is all quite hard work, it's the passion for poetry that keeps me going. And even in the midst of all of this, I still just stop and dip into poems that I suddenly remember. I dip into them as though a kind of weary traveller on a long dusty road should find a beautiful, inviting sort of well or pool by the side of the road where he can bathe and refresh himself. And that's what poetry often feels like for me. So the poems I've been dipping into, my slender volumes from amongst my shelf of slender volumes of modern poetry. This is the latest from the American poet Luci Shaw. It's called The Eye of the Beholder. It's a beautiful cover, isn't it? Which unfortunately I've spilt coffee on. She's a poet of very particular and clear and delicate observation of nature. Writes these very lucid sort of poems of limpid clarity. But they're not just showing you what's there. They're full of the details of the visible. And as you can see from this title, The Eye of the Beholder, implying beauty, of course, is in the eye of the beholder. She is very much about seeing, but they're also, as it were, full, with a kind of plenitude of invisible things. The visible things carry with them hints and glints of love, attention, companionship, and also of the divine shining through. And that's very much the theme of these poems. So I thought I'd read you the title poem and just two or three other really short ones in here to give you a taste of her work. I've been encouraged by her, not only just as any writer is encouraged by good writing in another writer, but she specifically, at a time when I was hardly known and published, she saw some of my poems and encouraged me. And as an editor, a poetry editor in various journals, she published the first poem of mine that was ever published in North America, quite a long time ago now, in a journal called Radix. And so she's been an encouragement. And this is a new book. But the other thing which is frankly hugely encouraging about this is that this is a book that she's produced in her 90s. I mean, she's in her 90s and she's still writing really at her peak. So that, I'm in my 60s now, so I'm very encouraged. It makes me feel like the 60s are the new 30s, So there's more to come. Anyway, let me just give you... I'll read you the title poem and see what you make of it. So The Eye... It's just not called this, it's just called Eye of the Beholder. Beauty, yes, but not only. After God's 6 days slowed, he checked and regarded all he saw with more than ordinary satisfaction. In fact, it was, he murmured, very good. That was day 7. And now his looking is a part of us. A second sight, a new dimension, we might call it vision, awareness grounded not in the eye only. The answering soul now has a fresh capacity, more far-seeing than the optics of retina, lens and light. My husband's old sketch in pen and ink, tree trunk, bark mottled like skin, knotty roots anchored in a river bank, and higher up a flare of delicate foliage. We remember seeing it no longer as thready black strokes on paper, but in the vivid green of life. And now, born of a seriousness of intent, the mutual gaze between earth and heaven, our hearts and God's, a dialogue of glances, grows with the steady regard of love. And that poem is also a riff on Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream about the poet's eye, the fine frenzy rolling, does glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven. This back and forth between the divine and the earthly. That glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, now becomes in her a mutual gaze between earth and heaven. It's heaven looking at us. But of course, because she's mentioning her husband and the sketch, and the two of them looking at the sketch and not seeing just the marks of the ink, but seeing the tree because they both saw it, you can't help but feeling that the context in which she's able to speak of a mutual gaze, a dialogue of glances grows with the steady regard of love. That she's talking about her long marriage. She's talking about the joy of having seen two things together and the little glances that started a relationship, and that's now the steady regard of love. And the word regard there is so beautiful, both to regard, to see, and the regard that people hold with one another. But now, if you like, that horizontal relationship, that mutuality of the long marriage, becomes itself a metaphor, an emblem for the mutuality of heaven and earth, and the idea that we see sometimes with God's eyes, and we can hear, as it were, God within us as we admire something, saying, "It is good." Now, there's some lovely examples of how that works, and how God himself, when we forget that he's gazing with us, and giving us that upon which we gave, it sort of nudges us a little. So there's a lovely poem called Signals, which also has, I would guess, something from her marriage in it. You know, that lovely thing that lovers do when they're walking along a beach, you know, somebody might just write the other's initials in the sand and wonder if they're going to see it. And that's picked up and transfigured in this poem. It's called a poem called Signals. I think I saw an edge of God looking sideways at me. There were my initials in the sand, like a lover's declaration. He nudged me, asking if I had noticed. Later, he showed me himself as a honeycomb with bees. And when I didn't respond, he presented me with a hillside of trees with red and yellow leaves. And finally, I understood and wrote him this thank you note. So then the poem itself is lovely. It becomes the sort of thank you note to God. And then perhaps my favourite poem in the whole book, which is called Bird Psalm. I mean, I've been thinking about the Psalms quite a lot and making my own responses, poetic responses to the book of Psalms. And this poem, it's about hearing birdsong early in the morning, but it delicately explores that thing which is sometimes called the pathetic fallacy, but what that means is that our own mood colours the way we see and hear things, and yet the things we see and hear can change and transform our mood. There can be that back and forth. And it's about waking in a time of disturbance after a bad dream and hearing the bird, and then coming to yourself a bit more and hearing the bird in a new way. I think it's just lovely, called Bird Psalm. Early light, before sun, and I hear an unknown bird singing his morning syllables. Pitiful, 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 in a voice too plaintive to be believed. Birds speak their native language, music with feathers. We pick up clues, but translation depends on our willingness to hear and listen. Maybe I've let last night's bad dream misinterpret his message. Maybe he's telling me this new day is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I love that transition from pitiful, pitiful, pitiful to beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And the assonance and music of the whole poem, you know, like singing his morning syllables. You can hear all the kind of both alliteration and assonance, the kind of music in that. It's such a simple, lucid poem, but the way it ends with beautiful, beautiful, beautiful is something that really gives me hope. It's a great poetry to dip into if you are, in fact, having a difficult day or a hard passage through time. just to be reminded of this mutual gaze, this steady regard between earth and heaven. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Do check her out. She's, I think, one of the foremost living poets. Thanks for dropping by.